greetings. So we left off with chapter 8, and Abeni is getting her magic lessons, and it's never what she expects. So I'm very interested to see how the old woman handles these magic lessons. I mean, she's lived since we don't know how old she is. So she has a lot up under her wings to share with her young apprentice. Let's get into it. Abeni's Song by Djeli Clark, Chapter 9, Lessons. Abeni winced, clutching a hand that stung from where it had been hit. She glared at Auntie Asha, who stood across from her, leaning against the familiar, gnarled walking stick. "Enough?" the old woman asked. Abeni didn't answer. Instead, glancing to the sword that lay on the ground, Auntie Asha huffed. "Stubborn child. If you must, try again." Abeni quickly reached down to pick the weapon up, gripping the hilt. She'd barely pointed the blade before the old woman's staff came whirling. The thick wood struck her sword hand, and the weapon tumbled away. She winced, sucking in air and shaking her fingers as if that might somehow relieve the stinging. This had been going on now for much of the early morning. Auntie Asha had instructed her to bring the sword and show what she'd practiced. Abeni was eager, wondering if the old woman would gift her with magic that would make her skilled at the sword, maybe even a magic sword. But each time Abeni even tried to lift the weapon, the old woman's staff rapped her hard on the hands. It was embarrassing, and it hurt. "Have you had enough now?" Auntie Asha asked. "Or is there still something you want to show me?" Abeni looked to the sword, then to that gnarled staff, and flinched. She shook her head. She didn't think her hands could afford any more of her pride. "Good," the old woman said. "Consider this your first lesson. Don't take things not meant for you. Now go and put that back where it belongs." Abeni didn't argue. In the house, she found the iron door already waiting. At a push, it opened to reveal the room of weapons. She hesitated briefly before putting the sword back. How many nights had she spent dreaming of wielding the thing? How many mornings and stolen moments had she used to practice with it, or at least she had thought she was practicing? Her throbbing hands made her think otherwise. She placed the sword back where she'd found it and left the room, not looking back to the door, which she knew was probably already gone. Outside, Auntie Asha was waiting in the same spot, holding something in her other hand now. It was a long, slender piece of wood, shorter than her own staff and straight with no twists or knots. When Abeni reached her, she handed it over. "Here." Abeni took the staff, made of smooth, hard brown wood. The thing was about her height and just wide enough to get her fingers around. "You'll find this more useful than any sword," Auntie Asha said. Abeni eyed her doubtfully. "But it's just a piece of wood." The old woman humphed. "A piece of wood you can lean on when you tire. That can support you when your legs give way. That you can use to carry things or defend yourself. Can a sword or a spear do all that?" When Abeni didn't respond, she just went on. "No. Swords and spears are only good for cutting and poking and stealing life. And once you have done so, it is a darkness you cannot be rid of." She snorted in disgust. "Do you know why I keep such a room filled with weapons? as a reminder of people's stupidity. What a day it would be when the proud warrior with a sword or spear understands they are still a fool. Abeni frowned at that. Her father and mother weren't fools. She thought to say as much, but the old woman tapped the piece of wood with appreciation. No, this is much better than any sword. Come, I'll show you. I'm going to fight you? Abeni asked uncertainly. Me? Auntie Asha chuckled, turning to go. No, these bones are too old to jump about all day. I found you a proper partner. Puzzled, Abeni followed her around the side of the house to find a peculiar sight. It was a man, only he was made completely of straw. The yellowed fibers bunched and wrapped together, giving him lanky arms and legs that fit onto a long torso. He towered over them both, his chest and back bent slightly. He even wore clothes, a long blue robe with white curving designs that fit over broad shoulders to hang down to just above his ankles. Here and there, bits of bright red string wrapped around where elbows and joints would have been, as if to keep his constructed body in place. He didn't have a face, just a head made up of straw, partly hidden by a wide, round, wooden hat that sloped up to end in a knot. He stood, waiting for them, holding a long staff, much like her own, in one hand. This is Obi, Auntie Asha said. At her words, the straw man unexpectedly came to life. Benny jumped back, startled, but he only removed his hat and bent down to give a flourishing bow. His body rustled as he moved, but stayed firmly in place. Auntie Asha put on a proud smile and winked. Didn't you say you wanted to see some magic? Abeni nodded in wonder, taking a while to remember to close her hanging jaw. So then, the older woman said with a clap of her hands, let's begin. The rest of the morning, Abeni practiced with the wood staff. She learned how to hold it, how to balance it, and move it properly. Obi was her instructor and sparring partner. The straw man moved nimbly, and he never tired. It was all she could do to keep up. But Auntie Asha kept her at it, with commands and instructions. Everything you need to know to wield that staff can be found all about you, the old woman said. She tapped her own staff as she spoke. The fisher bird scoops its catch. The sun touches the horizon. The wind whistles in the trees. Abeni listened, moving alongside Obi as the old woman spoke and her staff pounded out the rhythm. Her body leaned back, staff held before her, for the small tree sways in the wind. She planted, feet firm. The staff this time pointed straight ahead, for the boulder parts the stream. Obi lifted her arms or made her bend her knees when she was doing it wrong, and Auntie Asha called out new forms to learn. They practiced the whole day like that, and the one to follow, and the one after that. Each time it ended, Abeni was left exhausted and aching, but she got up every day, eager to start anew. At night, she found herself getting up to practice in her room. Her wall often displayed images of the forms. Even that stupid blanket helped, pulling her into the correct stances. She would work at the forms until she got them right or fell asleep, clutching the staff to her. And that wasn't all. Auntie Asha set about teaching Abeni many things, starting with the forest. As they did their daily chores, Asha no longer sat in silence, but spoke at length. She named the trees about them and how they grew. She pointed to the grass and the plants and explained how they could be used for food or healing. She showed where to find the burrows of animals and how to listen to the calls of birds. She even walked with Abeni to the stream to fetch water, demonstrating how best to balance a jug on your head. Finally, Abeni devoured it all, like a hungry person eager to be fed. She had no idea the forest was filled with so much to know about. The two of them ventured out to places where strange plants grew or climbed tall trees just to pluck a special leaf. She would spend whole afternoons with Auntie Asha, lying on the ground, watching ants go about their work while the old woman explained it in detail. She claimed there were little people so small that they sometimes rode on the backs of ants. Abeni had looked hard for them, but so far had never found any. They even dared to go out at night. Those were frightening at first, given her last time out at night in the forest. There were so many calls and cries and shadows, and she often scanned the skies, fearful the bat riders would return. But Auntie Asha explained the many sounds of the forest at night, the things to be aware of, and the things that were of no danger. She showed how to hide if need be, and how to use the stars to guide their way. Slowly, Abeni found her fears retreating. She actually began to look forward to their night trips, out to find flowers that bloomed only when the sun had gone down, and colorful frogs that croaked and sang to the moon. She quickly learned there was magic all throughout the Djembe forest. Maybe not the magic she had first thought to learn, but it was magic just the same. She'd just never noticed. Sometimes she sat out in the garden at night, just listening and trying to place a name to every sound, if they could be heard over the whispering grass. The old woman had explained that the tall green stalks were enchanted and spoke often if anyone bothered to listen. Now that Abeni knew how, she heard them all the time. Mostly they just gossiped, quite a lot in fact. Auntie Asha also told her more about the wider world of other forests, bigger even than the Djembe, of things called mountains, rivers so long they seemed to go on forever, places so cold that flakes of ice rained from the sky, like beyond the door to that room she'd opened, and others swirling with thick dust called sand. Abeni had been surprised at that. It turned out Sowoke's desert was real after all. Auntie Asha spoke as well of lands both near and far, with people as many as they were different. Abeni had never known there could be so many types of people. There were those from the far south, warriors who herded cattle and carried long spears and brightly decorated shields. Others, in the east, were said to build their houses from cut stone that towered into the sky. And there were people to the west who Auntie Asha claimed had so much gold they covered their skin in shimmering dust. She even described things called kingdoms that held even more wondrous things called cities, which the old woman claimed were like villages, only much, much larger, and with thousands of people. That, Abeni found, was perhaps the hardest to believe. How could thousands of people live in any one place? She couldn't even imagine what thousands of people might look like. And how could anyone be a chief over anything so big? That had to be impossible. A few times, the old woman also spoke of the war. Her voice would become a whisper. She would tell of the witch priest and his army, made up of frightening things like hyena men, giants called Zimwi who lived in dark caves, creatures like the night riders and their monstrous bats, and even worse things. She claimed that with each passing day, the witch priest's power was growing. Whole peoples, and even some of these great kingdoms, had fallen to him. The ghost ships came more now, and everywhere he touched burned with fire. Abeni was always silent during these talks. She knew this was never supposed to be part of her lessons, and when Auntie Asha caught herself, she'd stop abruptly and turn to something else. But one day, as Abeni listened to stories of war and troubles in the wider world, a question came that she couldn't hold back. "Where are the spirits?" she blurted out. Auntie Asha went quiet where she sat, patting pounded balls of plantain to eat with their meal. But Abeni pressed on. "My mother told me the spirits watch over the world to make certain everything is right. Where are they? Why haven't they stopped this witch priest?" Auntie Asha stayed quiet for a long while before shaking her head, her hands continuing their work. "There are many kinds of spirits in the world. Some are flighty and care only for themselves. Some are of the dark, those who would gladly join the witch priest, for they delight in wickedness. Others are merely spirits of small places, streams, or trees, too weak to stand up to him. But there are powerful spirits who strive to keep the world in balance. They have not come forward. The witch priest uses their absence to turn the people from them." "Why haven't they come?" Abeni asked. "Why don't they stop him?" The old woman frowned, shaking her head. "Perhaps they've stopped caring." That left Abeni shaken. She had been taught the spirits were the life of the world. If they had gone from it, if they had stopped caring, the thought made her feel empty and suddenly alone. But she didn't have to dwell on such things long because there was always something new to do or to learn. One day, as she sat grounding up dried plants and placing them into gourds, Auntie Asha came and sat across from her, nodding appreciatively. Abeni smiled at the unspoken compliment. She was making the herbs and powders often mixed with mud or honey to make poultices, used for everything from mosquito bites to burns. Abeni recalled her mother's many herbs, though they'd never been so many. She had enlisted Obi's help. The straw man sat beside her, cross-legged and using a rounded stone to mash his own leaves. As he did so, the jewelry around his wrists clanked together noisily. "You've given him more of those things?" Auntie Asha grumbled. She tapped discerningly at the jewelry. "By the time you're done with him, he'll not be fit for sparring." "A straw man with jewelry. Cha!" Abeni grinned. She had gotten used to the older woman's gruff ways. "Oh, I think he's still good enough." It was true. Though the straw man sat tame now, his daily lessons hadn't lessened by a hair, and she had the welts to show it. Besides, I think he likes them. She had been stringing together bracelets from painted wood, beads, and bits of stone. Some she kept for herself. Others she offered to the straw man. She didn't think he was accustomed to getting presents. He lifted his arms to show off his gifts, shaking them until they rattled. Obi was as silent as a statue. Still, he talked in his own way. Abeni didn't know what magic kept him alive, but he now helped with chores and traveled with them into the forest, carrying baskets to help their gathering. "Show off," Auntie Asha muttered. Abeni smiled. "I've been wondering at something. Your sister, who takes care of people, the way you looked after our village. Are there more like you two who look after other places?" Auntie Asha fidgeted with her shawls, the way she always did when asked a question she didn't quite like. "There were once, many of us, until people decided they didn't need us anymore and didn't want us anymore. They called us witches and drove us away, or built great cities we couldn't possibly tend to. I am the last of my kind in this forest. Beyond my sister, I do not know how many of us are left in the world. Is your sister as old as you? What's her village like? How far?" "Eh?" Auntie Asha exclaimed, throwing up her hands. "Do young girls ever tire of questions?" She let out a breath. "My sister is older than me, in fact, if you must know. And her village is much like any other, I suppose. Our kind tend to keep to the places we look over. This forest is my home, and hers is the valley. We used to talk often before these dark times." She stopped, an unreadable expression coming over her face. Then with a shake, she seemed to catch herself. "Enough of this work for the day. I have something new." Abeni stopped her grinding, wiping her hands on her dress. She had learned not to press on things like this. A few nudges at a time worked best. "I want to sing you the song of your people," Auntie Asha said. Abeni's eyes rounded. It had been a long time ago that the old woman had promised to sing it for her. So much had happened since that she put it out of her head. Or at least she'd found other things to take up her time. But now she was eager to hear it. Nodding, she settled back to listen. Obi did the same, stopping his mashing and going still. Auntie Asha closed her eyes and took a breath, then began. Her voice was beautiful, strong but surprisingly soft. It came through clear, momentarily drowning out the sounds of the forest. Abeni listened, entranced. As the words flowed from Auntie Asha's lips, they painted images, creating a tale that fit together like a pattern on a piece of cloth. It told of the first people who had come to the place where her village stood, how they had decided this was where they would build their homes, of how they had met the old woman, who was old even then, and how they made their pact with her to watch over them, to help guide them, how she promised to be with them for as long as the village stood. The words and the story they wove filled Abeni with wonder. This was a kind of magic she'd never felt before, and the day fast slipped away as she listened. The song turned sad as it reached the destruction of her village and the story of the one girl who survived. Then it stopped. "What's wrong?" Abeni asked, yearning for more. "Nothing," Auntie Asha answered. "The song is simply at an end." Abeni sat back. "I'm the girl who survived. You are all that remains of your village, all that remains of my song." Abeni felt a pang of sadness. "Will you finish it?" The old woman shrugged. "How am I to sing a song that has not yet happened? No, you will have to learn the song of your people, and then make it complete." "Me?" Abeni exclaimed. "I don't know anything about magic songs." "Then I will teach you, but I sing that song to keep your people close," Auntie Asha said, cutting off her protests. "If this song is not passed to you, who will sing it when I'm gone?" Abeni went quiet. This task seemed more than she could handle. "You are a clever girl," Auntie Asha said, reading her doubt. "I have faith in you. Now you must have the same. Abeni bit her lip, casting a glance to Obi. The straw man's faceless head bobbed up and down beneath his wide-brimmed wooden hat. Abeni nodded. Teach me. Auntie Asha smiled. Let us start at the beginning. So now we know what Abeni's song is, and it reminds me of the cultural practice of Oriki, which is Yoruba praise poetry. It is people's history told in song, not written down. It's the way griots and Djelis of West Africa passed down oral history, or our story, their story. It's how people know themselves. I'm looking up the definition of Oriki, and one definition online says it is an important and cultural, unwritten oral genre of Yoruba literature that is usually used in praise singing. The Yoruba people have very rich cultural oral literature. Oriki is one of them. Oriki is used during individual or communal ceremonies for individuals or the community. Oriki possesses a full definition of its owner. For instance, it tells of the nobility, the origin, the fame, profession, accomplishments, beliefs, eating habits, discipline, to mention a few about its owner. It should be noted that Yoruba people have Oriki for almost every existing thing in their environment. The animals, plants, animate and inanimate organisms. Although Oriki is most of the time meant to praise sing, it is also used otherwise. For instance, Thief Ole has its own Oriki, while the brave heroes and the warriors in a community have Oriki with which they are identified. Traders, the compromisers in a community, also have their Oriki. And then there are categories of Oriki. And so this website, www.ekimogunde, oh, it's hard to say, www.ekimogundedescendant.org. Well, since I'm referencing them, I'll put it in the notes so you can access it for yourself. The following are some categories of Oriki. Oriki Olorun, that's Oriki for God. The Yorubas understand and respect the existence of the Most High Creator as the supreme force and power that holds the universe. There are different verses and versions of Oriki that exist for the Most High. Some of the names that exist in the Oriki include Orisha Nla, Olodumare. Then there's Oriki Orisha. These are different that emanate from different communities about the gods or goddesses they worship. Each of the gods or goddesses possess its own unique Oriki. It's going real deep, so I'm going to stop now. Well, there's a couple more I want to. This is so interesting. I love the continent of Africa and the glorious history that we're never it's mostly not shared with us, but the age of the internet, right? Oriki Oba Ati Ijoye for monarchs and chiefs. Obas, Baales, and chiefs in Yoruba tradition are accorded much respect. This reflects in the tradition of Oriki. There are special drummers, Onilu, and the chanters that are professionally trained to recite the Oriki Idile of kings, the chiefs, and their relatives at ceremonies. Oriki Idile for families. This is the one that Auntie Asha is singing for Abeni. Every son and daughter of Yoruba inevitably has an Oriki that falls into this category. While children adopt the Oriki from their father's family, however, they are not alienated to the Oriki of their mother's lineage. It is the tradition for wives to learn the Oriki of their husbands, even before marriage. Although Oriki is a much timely record keeping and codification of the literature and culture using modern information, people of a family are identified with their Oriki. All right, I'm getting way too into that and off the story. But yes, this is the source of Abeni's song. And how beautiful is it to have your history, the knowledge of your being sung to you? Is that not beautiful? And so then it carries on to the next generation. And Abeni is the last girl of her village. So it's up to her to not only remember that song, but to add on to it. And so that's what she's trying to do with the lessons and the magic, the beautiful magic that she's learning. I loved how Auntie Asha showed her that iron sword is not the end-all, be-all. And she quickly got rid of Abeni's expectations to have a magic sword. Yes, magic is involved, but it takes work. It takes practice over and over and over and over and over again. And I love how their relationship is just growing and building. And they're going out into the forest during the day and the night. And she's becoming aware of the magic that already exists around her. Magic exists around us too. Look at the sky. Look at the trees. Look at the water. The air we breathe. It already exists around us. And Abeni is getting the lessons that are deeply indigenous to African culture. And she's getting the type of lessons that could never be found in a book. Never, ever, ever. This is a beautiful rendition of the culture of West Africa. Absolutely beautiful. The girl who survived has to carry on her village's song, her family's song, her bloodline's song, and add her portion to it. And that's a big, big, big responsibility. So I understand that, she was intimidated by it. But she has her new family, who is Auntie Asha, all the house they live in, the magic and the pots, and Obi. Oh, I love the addition of that character to the story, because Obi he just adds that extra oomph. He's just magic brought to life, and that's what Abeni said she wanted, right? Some magic. This is just, it's nice. I could just visualize this as a movie. It would be a great, great, great movie. So, yeah. Let's see what happens next. For the rest of the day, the old woman taught her the song and continued to do so each day after that. She sang bits of it while Abeni practiced her sparring, or at meals, or through their forest gathering. Whenever a spare moment presented itself between her other lessons, Abeni learned the song. Soon she was able to practice parts of it herself, and hummed idly as she did her chores or before bed. Sometimes she sang it to Obi, who shook his head if she skipped a verse or got it wrong. Other times she sat in the garden at night, singing to the whispering stalks of grass which swayed and sang it back. This was how she spent her days, which became so many she stopped counting. Instead, she measured time by the moon, or when rains came and went, causing the plants to flower and change with the seasons. She became used to the forest, this home, and those who dwelled there, a girl, an old woman, and a straw man. They were a family, even if a decidedly strange one. It was the morning after a particularly strong storm that Abeni was awakened by noise. She jumped from sleep, muttering to her feisty blanket that she was awake before it could throw her. But she stopped at the strange sight of a figure in a large wooden mask peering down at her, dancing about and beating a rounded drum. Green vines surrounded its face, where a mouth of yellow and green beads was fixed in a smile. Accompanying the dancer was a tall figure in a red and white mask, like an animal, either an anteater or an elephant. He juggled brightly colored balls filled with seeds or stones that rattled while he hopped back and forth on straw legs. Abeni sat up now, rubbing her eyes. Was she dreaming? No. The two masked figures were Auntie Asha and Obi. Upon seeing her awake, the pair went still and opened their arms wide. The balls in Obi's hand fell to the ground, exploding into bright bits of blue and red light before vanishing into colorful smoke. "Happy birthday!" Auntie Asha cried out. Abeni frowned before her eyes rounded. "Birthday? Could it be?" "It's your birthday, little rainbringer," Auntie Asha confirmed, removing her mask to show an uncharacteristic smile. "Or at least the one your village celebrated." "Harvest festival," Abeni breathed, hardly believing it. "Had it been so long? I thought you might like to look nice on your special day," Auntie Asha said. She motioned to Obi, then frowned when he didn't react. "Did you forget them?" The straw man put a hand to his head before gliding hurriedly from the room. Auntie Asha sighed, muttering something about having straw between the ears. When Obi returned, he carried a bundle in his arms. It was her gold dress, the one with the red spirals, along with her sandals and even her mother's jewelry. Everything she'd worn on her last birthday. They'd been folded away all this time. The straw man moved to offer it, but stopped. "Not so soon," Auntie Asha said. She looked down with one raised eyebrow. "If I recall, someone is supposed to be going through her first rites." Abeni's eyes widened. "First rites?" she murmured. How could she have forgotten? This was her 13th harvest day. She'd finally seen 13 harvest seasons. "So then," Auntie Asha declared with a toothy grin, "let us start the ritual." Abeni yelped as she was pulled from the bed by the blanket. She thought they were on better terms now. The thing was a menace. With Auntie Asha and Obi flanking her, she was led away into the hall to stop before a door. Round and yellow. "I remember this one," she said, surprised at finding the door again. "Good," Auntie Asha nodded. "Then you will have no trouble going inside." Abeni looked up in surprise. Inside? She remembered what opening that door had led to. A windy place that rained wet and cold flakes. She thought it was what the old woman had once described as snow. "Inside," Auntie Asha confirmed, "you will bring me back the berries of a red tree. That will be your first task." A red tree? Abeni wasn't sure what to make of that. "Here," the old woman said, "this might prove helpful." She offered up, of all things, Abeni's blanket, the very one that tried to yank her from bed each morning. She accepted it, frowning. What was she going to do with a blanket? Before she could ask the question, the door swung open. A blast of frigid air shook her to the bone, and she immediately wrapped up in the blanket. Well, she supposed that answered that. "Remember," Auntie Asha said, looking down at her sternly, "help may arrive from where you least expect. You are ready?" Abeni wasn't certain what that meant. "I think I am." "Good," the old woman broke in, then promptly pushed her inside. Abeni squawked as she stumbled into the cold. Wind howled in her ears, and the stinging bits of snow tried to cover her all over. She pulled the blanket even tighter and turned back to see the door already gone. Her heart leapt in her throat. Had the old woman trapped her in here? No, she said this was a task. "Well, you'd better get on with it," she said through chattering teeth. She looked about. Wherever she was, There was snow everywhere, covering everything in a sheet of cold white powder. She didn't think there was a sky here, or at least she couldn't see one. There was just a shadowy gloom obscured by the swirling flakes. Her eyes were still searching about when they fell on something in the distance, a speck of red. Setting out, she trudged towards it, pushing through snow that chilled her sandaled feet. As she neared the speck, it grew larger until she could make it out. A tree, which looked as if it were growing right there, out in the open. She stood before it, gaping. The tree didn't look like any tree she knew. Instead of bark, it was made from something red and almost translucent. She put a hand to it, smooth and hard. Cold, too, as cold as the snow. She looked up, its length to bare branches, stripped of leaves. Wait, not completely. Squinting, she made out one lone leaf high above, with red berries that glinted. There you are. Just need to get you. That turned out to be easier said than done. The tree wasn't just cold. It burned to touch it too long. She shook her hands, trying to get warmth back into them, hopping from one of her cold feet to the other. How could something so cold burn? It was also slippery. She was a good climber and had scaled more than a few trees, but she couldn't even get to the first branch of this thing. Sliding down the smooth trunk at each attempt, she fixed an infuriated glare up at the leaf. It might as well be as far away as the moon for all she could do to get to it. "Where's that help you said might arrive?" she muttered, thinking of Auntie Asha's parting words. A sudden yanking almost took her off balance. She caught herself in surprise, and the yank came again. Her eyes found the blanket. The thing had come alive again and was tugging at her. Another pull sent her stumbling, and she tried to tear it off. But the blanket wrapped about her face, stifling her muffled cries. Fighting to get free, she finally succeeded and looked to find it had slipped between her hands and was now standing straight up, gone stiff. She stared at the crazy thing, wondering what could have possibly possessed it to behave so bizarrely. When she noticed, its tip almost reached the leaf above. She inhaled sharply, understanding. "Can you get it?" The blanket made a movement that she hoped was a nod. Gripping the thing, she lifted it higher and watched as the tip reached just beneath the leaf. The forms she practiced with the staff came without thinking. Cricket hops the bush sent her leaping, and cat swishes its tail made her flick the blanket's stiff end at the branch. There was a quick snap, and the leaf fell away. Abeni caught it before her feet met the ground, smiling in triumph. As she held the leaf in her hands, the blanket folded itself back around her shoulders, bundling her in its warmth. "Thank you," she whispered. The blanket responded with a sharp slap at her face. "Ow!" she cried. "What was that for?" Her words stopped at seeing the door had reappeared. "Oh, right." When she trudged back through the opening, Auntie Asha and Obi were there. The straw man shook a rattle while the old woman hurriedly bundled her in a thicker blanket, dusting away flakes of snow. "You did well," she said. Her hand produced a small jar of white paint. Dipping a forefinger inside, she applied a small dot on Abeni's forehead. A branch with colorful leaves came next, brushing cool wetness upon her cheeks. "The dot is to mark you, the waters of the branch to sweep away some part of the child in you and make clean the path to come. You have completed your first ritual and learned your first lesson. Sometimes you must work alongside those you might not always get along with to achieve a greater goal. Do not let your pride or theirs be your undoing." Abeni looked to the blanket about her shoulders. She supposed they had worked together at that. Opening her hand, She showed the old woman the leaf, but before she could present it, the thing began shriveling before her eyes. In a few blinks, she was holding nothing but water, which ran through her fingers to drip onto the floor. Another lesson, Auntie Asha said. Sometimes the things we seek and work hardest to obtain may not be possible. Abeni shook her head confused. Then why bother trying? The old woman smirked. To try, girl, is sometimes all we ever have. We cannot know the outcome of any task if we do not start there. Speaking of tasks, are you ready for your next? Abeni looked down to where the water now pooled and then back up to Auntie Asha. I'm ready to try. That actually made the old woman smile. The rest of the morning held more rituals. Abeni thought some might have been from her village. Others had undoubtedly been the old woman's creations. She was sent to rooms twice again and set upon strange tasks. Auntie Asha whispered secret things in her ears, told her new truths to remember, and some things she should never repeat. When it was finally over, her face bore many more white dots, and her cheeks were brushed one last time with the wet branch and leaves. Let this water wash away much of you that was as a child, Auntie Asha intoned. They stood now in the garden, amid the tall grass stalks, who all chittered excitedly. But not all, as we must hold on to some bit of that time. Let it wash away childish things, but allow you to remember them too. Now, put on your finest garments so that you might be properly presented. With Obi's help, Abeni wrapped herself in her gold dress and fitted her jewelry about her neck and fingers, all the things she had kept with her since her last birthday. When they were done, she walked out as a young woman to be presented to her small village, an old woman and a straw man. There was great applause alongside the noise of rattles and drums. Even the grass stalks cheered, and Abeni found herself grinning under it all. The rest of that day, there were no chores or sparring. Instead, the three of them celebrated. Abeni clapped and laughed as Auntie Asha and Obi dressed up in different masks taken from one of the rooms. Some of the masks seemed to come alive and made odd faces and sounds. She joined them, singing and dancing in memory of Harvest Festival. They ate and drank and even splashed around in the stream while Auntie Asha set instruments to make music on their own and cause bowls and plates to prance about. It was the most fun Abeni could remember having in a long time, which made it even odder when she began to cry. It was almost night when the tears came, heavy and without warning, like a storm out of a blue sky. One moment she was laughing. The next her eyes burned and cheeks were wet. She cried so hard her body shook. Obi paused in his juggling. The instruments went quiet, and the bowls and plates ceased their prancing. Auntie Asha walked over then, wrapping long arms about her and holding her close. I'm sorry, Abeni stammered. I was just enjoying all of this, and then I remembered Fomi. We couldn't wait for this, to complete our first rites together, and now it's here. But she isn't. She's gone. They're all gone. It seems wrong to celebrate. Auntie Asha put a hand to her chin and lifted it up so that their gazes met. Those black eyes held her firm. It is fine to feel sadness. This day was a sad one. It will likely always be. But I wanted to show you that there is also happiness. Let this be the final lesson for you today. Life is filled with moments that can bring pain and joy at once. That night, Abeni dreamt of Fomi, her family, her village. It was Harvest Festival. Everyone was celebrating. everyone was happy, and as she slept, she smiled. And the old woman saves Abeni once again. At some point in the day, she would have woken up and remembered that it was her birthday. Perhaps. Who knows? But at some point, she would have remembered that she wasn't just 12 anymore, that she was 13. So the best way to deal with it, well, the most beautiful way, I love that word, beautiful. The most beautiful way to deal with it was to treat it like it was supposed to be treated. She was 13. And in her culture, in her village, they had rites of passage from girlhood to young womanhood. And who knew better all the traditions and ways of going from young girl to young woman than Auntie Asha? And so I love how she's taking her through the rituals and, telling her what each dot meant, an accomplishment, another task completed, and the secrets, not even written in this fantasy book. There are certain secrets because in real life, there are rites of passage in West African cultures similar to the one described in this chapter. And there are secrets that are not shared for everyone. I remember I read Malidoma Some's book of Water and Spirit, and he described a lot of what went on during his own rites of passage. Unfortunately, he was kidnapped away from his people at the age of 4. He escaped from the Jesuit priests at the age of, I believe it was 18, and walked all the way through the forest. Now, this is real life that I'm telling you. Malidoma Some, his book of Water and Spirit, he writes all about it. And he made it through the forest. Similar forest like described in this book, on his own. Whew, that's a miracle. That's magic. And back to his village. But it was strange because the Jesuit priests hadn't done for him what Auntie Asha is doing for Abeni. The Jesuit priests did not connect him to his culture. What they did was indoctrinate him with their culture, with their way of thinking, believing, acting, belief systems, ways of eating, ways of dealing with nature, ways of dealing with other men, ways of dealing with women, just all kinds of things they put in him. And so when he got back to his village, he had a lot of unlearning to do in order to even be able to relate to his people, communicate with his people. And his journey was not easy. It wasn't as celebratory as Abeni's is with Auntie Asha and Obi. But ultimately, it did turn out that he did what he was supposed to do in this life. And he produced a lot of great work. But his work was more centered on trying to help the West itself, Western society, make sense out of, let me not try to analyze his work. My point is that much of this book taps into the real life cultural traditions that work for people on the African continent, and it helps build the core of who they are and give them confidence. And the lessons about having to work with people you might not necessarily get along with, and about sometimes you try to do things and it's not necessarily possible, but you'll never know if you don't try. And just great life lessons that are way better than just in a book. Way better than just, I read it, I took a test about it, now I quote unquote know it. Do you know it? Do you? But when you're doing things such as a rites of passage ceremony, You literally live it. You are told it in your ear. You are made to remember it because you practice it over and over and over again. Not just read a book, take a test, and then pass a test and can't even remember 10 years later what you read in that book, what you took on that test, but you got 100%. 100% of what? So Abeni's lessons are lessons of such depth. Even the song, and back to the song again, I found a wider definition of Oriki that I wanted to share before I end this episode. And it's on that same website, which again will be in the description box. Oriki is a kind of Yoruba literary genre used to inspire people. It is usually in the form of poetry, consisting of songs of praise. Oriki can also take the name form as well. One must learn, memorize, and be able to chant the Oriki of individuals and families. The Yorubas believe that a person's name relates to his or her spiritual essence. So they take their time giving names to their children. It is believed if you call a person by his or her Oriki, it inspires them. Yoruba language and culture is quite enduring and deep, evidenced by the fact that close to 200 years after slavery, the culture and language survives in some parts of the Americas. In 1977, a lady came from Brazil, performed the Shango ritual ceremony exactly to the letter as is still being practiced in Western Nigeria till today. Wow. Oriki element of Yoruba culture serves the following purposes. 1, poetry and entertainment. 2, means of identity. You must know your Oriki as it proves what part of Yoruba land right to the household you are from. Tribal marks, also in conjunction, serves the same purpose. From looking at your tribal mark, anybody will know the town you're from. 3, history, and means of establishing and understanding your ancestry. It tells the weakness and the strengths of your ancestors and forebears, and could give an insight to family traits and behavior, past achievements, health issues, antecedents, family migration patterns, and family ties to other towns and villages in Yoruba land. And 4, spirituality. The Yorubas believe that the Oriki and knowledge of it has a spiritual essence. It is believed that a person who does not know his Oriki loses his spiritual essence. There was a story of a young man who would always fight and create all kinds of problems. Investigation was conducted into his Oriki, and it was discovered that his forebears were warriors, and it was their nature and destiny to fight wars. Unfortunately, he lived in a generation where there were no wars. His problem was solved by involving him in combat sports. In another case, a young man who was usually troublesome with a terrible, fierce temper that does not easily subside. Oftentimes, the Oriki specialist would be called to calm him down. As soon as the woman would appear from distance chanting his Oriki and some other words, his temper would immediately begin to subside. The Oriki is viewed as a spiritual channel of transmitting the collective consciousness of ancestors to children of the next generation. Each child at birth is given a prefix Oriki in addition to his names, which could be several names. This prefix is then added to the established immediate family Oriki, followed by the extended family narrative, which is then to the town Oriki narrative. Wow. And I remember looking up Abeni's name because I know African names generally have a true meaning. And her name means the one we asked for, the one we prayed for. And her family named her that, not necessarily knowing how things would turn out, but she is the one they prayed for. And she is trying her best to become the woman she is destined to become. but it's not easy. Her journey, even just to get to know her song is a long one. But she has been blessed with such a great teacher. And then Obi is right there with them. Nice. Until next chapter. There was one other aspect of this chapter that I wanted to make sure that I addressed, and it was the portion of Abeni's lessons when Auntie Asha was teaching her about the world outside of her village and how there were some places where there was war. And that was something Abeni wasn't used to, because that's not something that came to her village before that very day. And when it came, it was brutal. There's no word for the level of brutality that happened when she was face to face with war for the first time at the age of 12. And she wasn't ready. And she witnessed her parents' attempts to fight. But because spirit, dark forces, evil, wicked forces were at work with those particular warriors, and they just had Auntie Asha, she could only save that one child, Abeni. And Abeni had questions because those masks that were celebrated at Harvest Festival, the masks, the drums, where were the spirits that her parents had told her about? And that was a hard question for Auntie Asha to deal with, because that was a truth that some truths are difficult. How did that wicked spirit win and get to take people away from their homes, destroy everything, leave the earth scorched the way they did? And Auntie Asha gave her what she could. She's powerful, but she don't have every single answer, because everything, the world, is bigger than any just one person. So no one person knows everything. But with her wisdom, she tried her best to explain how if people don't necessarily believe in their spirits, one thing is, nothing's just going to keep giving to you and you don't give nothing back. So spirits, I'll give you Christianity, for example. People will say, in the name of Jesus, or whatever else they say. It's like you have to Jesus. And the only Son of God, the one Son that God had, the only one. And that has built up places like the Vatican, which is basically a city in Italy, in Rome, Italy, somewhere, I don't know where it's at, but the Vatican, right? And the system of Christianity that includes popes and Catholicism and Baptists and Presbyterian and Mormons and all those kind, but it's still under that one umbrella of Christianity. And it has people evoking that ancestral name, the one that they've written was like 2,000 years old, I think. That's what's said, or something like that. Jesus. They're calling, people are invoking the energy of that spiritual ideology. So when multiple bodies are giving energy to a spirit, to an energy, it thrives, it lives. So when spirits no longer hear or feel or are given that same energy that they give to us, maybe they just stop caring. Because spirits don't necessarily need us. The breath of life, the spirit within each one of us, comes from a higher spirit. And we need that spirit. The spirit don't need us. We need that spirit. But when we stop believing that we need our own spirits, and we start believing in other people's stuff, and we give our energy away, we feed in that which might destroy us sometimes. So it was a hard lesson for Asha to impart to Abeni, who's no longer just her apprentice, no longer a child she just saved from war, but like she loves her. She loves her like a mother, like a grandmother, like a great-grandmother, like a great-great-grandmother. How old is Auntie Asha? So she loves her with a depth it's hard to speak to a child about war. So maybe that's why some adults don't speak to children about the bad parts of what goes on with some adults. But if children aren't prepared, like Abeni wasn't prepared when she was confronted with war, it was hard for her to even accept being saved by somebody like Auntie Asha, who was seen as just some old witch in the woods with her herbs and her ways. But Auntie Asha is the keeper of the culture. Auntie Asha was able to welcome her to a new way of seeing her birthday, and she was able to take her through her rites of passage, and she was able to sing her history to her the way she did, and put courage and strength and skills and love and wisdom into young Abeni in the ways that somebody else, you think that's what the other kids are getting over there with the witch priest who led them away with his songs and his promises? Come on now. That witch priest is taking them to benefit him and his beliefs and his way of life. He's not somebody who's coming to get along, to trade or to learn to blend in and to like a give and take situation. He's only come to take. And so he's not going to teach her Oriki song. He's not going to teach those children their Oriki songs. He's going to teach those children his praise songs, his poetry, his literature, his belief system. Period. They're not going to, just like he scorched the earth of their village, he's going to scorch the earth of their memories. He would never want them to sing to their own spirits, to praise their own spirits, their own culture. If you recall, I believe chapter 2 is when the war happened. I forget which chapter. But when Abeni went back, she saw the masks, the drums, all the things of her culture just heaped in a pile and discarded like they were nothing. But when she's over there with Auntie Asha, who keeps those things alive in her magic, her house of magic. And she has to have the pots that way. They have to keep secrets because people like the witch priest want to come and take everything for themselves, and what they can't benefit from, they want to discard it like it's nothing. So Auntie Asha is a treasure, but people have disregarded treasures like her. And they want to build the big cities and just forget about their spirits until they need their spirits to help them fight what's coming against them. So it's a hard question and a hard answer. But Abeni is courageous and she wants to know because she wants to find a solution. Her love for her family, her people is undying. And so she had questions. She wanted to know. She's becoming a warrior. Her journey is intense, to say the least. Until the next chapter.